Let us then turn to item 18 on the agenda. This is a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance proposal for cats and dogs over the age of 6 months. And the matter is before us after some extended additional study as to what might be an appropriate way for the city to mitigate the experience that we and other cities have with respect to aggressive dogs. So we're here tonight to consider a possible ordinance. The recommendation that is before us is to direct the city attorney to draft an ordinance and return within 60 days to establish a fee differential such that a dog license for an unaltered animal is $60 more than the charge for a spayed, neutered animal, and to find that this action is exempt from CEQA. The introduction and the presentation will be made by our Director of Public Works, Siobhan Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening, as the Mayor indicated, based on input from the Pasadena Humane Society, staff recommends that the City Council take 2 actions. First, to direct the City Attorney to draft an ordinance and return within 60 days, mandating spay and neuter of all species of cats and dogs over 6 months of age, excluding those that meet exclusion criteria, and establish a fee differential such that a dog license for an unaltered animal is $60 more than for a spayed or neutered dog. In terms of background, on July 8, 2013, the City Council directed the City Attorney to prepare a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance for dogs and cats over 4 months of age. On October 7, 2013, the City Council considered introduction of that ordinance and postponed action for 6 months or until the Pasadena Humane Society completes its initial round of dog license canvassing, which it began on July 1st of 2013, and asked the Legislative Policy Committee to consider advocating for state legislation to allow dog breed-specific regulations. On October 23rd, 2013, the Legislative Policy Committee met and recommended that the City Council consider an ordinance requiring mandatory spay and neuter for pit bull and pit bull crossbreed dogs, modeled after a Riverside County ordinance that was adopted in early October. On November 25th, 2013, the City Council directed the City Attorney to prepare a mandatory spay and neuter ordinance for pit bull and pit bull crossbreed dogs. On January 27th, 2014, the City Council tabled the first reading of this ordinance and directed staff to return on July 14th with Pasadena Humane Society statistics and options on how to proceed with a mandatory spay-neuter requirement. The benefits of a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance for all cats and dogs over the age of 6 months has benefits in terms of animal welfare. Sterilization helps pets live longer, healthier lives by preventing cancer and other life-threatening illnesses, and improving pet behavior by reducing aggression and the tendency to roam. Of the 3,900 dogs and cats that entered the Humane Society shelter in fiscal year 2014, 69% of dogs and 57% of cats were unwanted strays. Of the 283 dogs euthanized in fiscal year 2014, 53% were due to behavioral issues. Another benefit of the proposed ordinance is population reduction. To give you an idea of how prolific reproduction can be, one unspayed female cat and offspring can have 73,000 kittens in 6 years' time. The Pasadena Humane Society is dedicated to minimizing unnecessary euthanasia. Yet, 739 cats and 283 dogs were euthanized in fiscal year 2014. Underage cats coming into the shelter are indicative of uncontrolled breeding. 39% of the cats euthanized in fiscal year 2014 were less than 2 months of age. There is also a high owner turn-in rates at the shelter, which are symbolic of unwanted pets. Of the 3,900 dogs and cats entering the shelter in fiscal year 2014, 17% of the cats and 12% of the dogs were owner turn-ins. Another benefit of a spay-neuter ordinance is public safety. As presented to the City Council last July by the Department of Public Health, scientific research shows that the greatest risk factors for attacks by dogs are unaltered males, which represent 70 to 76% of reported dog bite incidents, females with puppies. There have been 271 total reported dog bites in Pasadena in calendar years 2011, 12, and 13. Further, 6 incidents involving use of force by the police department against dogs occurred from calendar year 2011 to present. The proposed ordinance would make mandatory spay and neuter for all cats and dogs over 6 months of age, with certain exemptions. These include veterinarian certified as having health reason for not being spayed or neutered, typically due to age and infirmity, licensed or owned by registered breeders, dogs used by public law enforcement agencies, and assistance dogs. Those would be exempted under the proposed ordinance. The proposed fee schedule would be structured to encourage compliance with the proposed spay and neuter requirement. Staff in Pasadena Humane Society recommends dog license fees with a cost differential, and this is similar to what was presented to the City Council last July. Our fiscal year 2015 dog license fees are $16.15 for an altered dog and $32.28 for an unaltered dog. Under the proposed fee structure, the unaltered dog would cost $60 more than the unaltered dog as an incentive to encourage sterilization. That concludes my presentation. Tonight we do have representatives from Pasadena Humane Society, Steve McNall and Elizabeth Campo, available if you would like a brief introduction of this item by the staff.
Steve, Elizabeth, would you like to speak on behalf of the Humane Society?
Mayor, City Council, staff, first of all, I really want to commend your staff for the work they've put into this project. They've done an absolutely splendid job. And I know that at the very beginning, when we started this process a few years ago, it was like, well, I don't know if this is going to work, if it's not going to work. But you know what? I think the more of the employees and the citizens in the city of Pasadena got involved and saw what was happening not only in our shelter but other public shelters, they see that they can make a difference in saving thousands upon thousands of lives in the future. And so we really do appreciate the hard work and effort that staff has put in. I don't have all the statistical data for everybody. Your people have that, and so does Elizabeth Campo, our senior vice president for the society. But I've been in this business, especially here in Pasadena Humane, since 1980. Starting off as a field officer, picking up impounded dogs and cats, and I've seen a tremendous change in the past 30 plus years. And I never really thought that I would ever see the day when we would have an ordinance come before, especially a great city like the city of Pasadena, that would really implement a mandatory spay-neutering program with limitations, but it would at least be another tool for us to cut down on not only pet overpopulation, but on aggressive animals. And so this has just been, this is a great day for us at the society, and hopefully we can move forward. But going back to just my personal experience, in 1980, the dogs and cats just kept coming in. Yes, we've had some laws and ordinances, throughout the years that have helped cut down pet overpopulation. But I have to tell you, you still walk into our shelter today and you see the stray dogs and the stray cats. That just never stops. It's an ongoing flow. So anything we can do to save one animal's life or keep one animal from being born that's not wanted is a positive step forward.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth Campo.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. It has been a pleasure to work with the City of Pasadena in compiling these statistics, and it was revelatory for us to be able to see, to break out the numbers specifically for Pasadena and to see what the incredible needs are in black and white. And one of the things I'd really like to note are the kittens, the cat population, taking a look at the amount of cats that are unwanted and unintended breeding. So that's something that we want to stop. We want to stop irresponsible breeding and unintentional breeding of both cats and dogs. We want the animals that are being bred in the city of Pasadena to be wanted animals, animals that will have a future home. Pasadena Humane Society is a wonderful facility, but it is not a home. And so we would rather them go directly into people's homes, which is why we support responsible breeding and why we're so excited to be able to look at an ordinance like this. And so I have some information about our licensing, and I'm available for questions in regards to that.
Are there any questions for Elizabeth at this time, or for Siobhan Foster? We have a large number of cards tonight. Oh, Mr. Kennedy, I'm sorry.
I have a quick question on page 3 that was also reflected on the slide. It shows, or it states that there are more than 65,000 dogs and cats in the city of Pasadena. And then on page 7, which I believe was reflected in the slide as well, it says that one unspayed female cat and her offspring can be responsible for the birth of 73,000 kittens in 6 years' time. Can someone kind of elaborate for us on where we got that number from?
This is a statistic from the American Veterinary and Medical Association, but I'll let Elizabeth elaborate on it.
Yes, well, the statistic for the estimate of the amount of animals is a formula from the American Veterinary Medical Association that's put together. It's a formula where you put in the population and they estimate based on the population and animal trends as to how many animals they expect to live within a certain community. As for the statistics for the, I'm not sure of the source for the statistics on the 73,000, but it does seem reasonable in our experience.
Well,
that was.
I'm not suggesting.
I mean, that was. Do you have the source?
It's from the American Veterinary and Medical Association.
Was for the 73,000. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not suggesting that it's incorrect. It just seems implausible to me, based upon that combined dogs and cats in the city of Pasadena, according to what appears on page 3, are at 65,000. So if we had one cat.
Councilmember Kennedy, if I could interject, that's not a statistic relative necessarily to the city of Pasadena. It's just an example of prolific reproduction of cats in general.
Yep, I was, thank you very much, Siobhan. But I was going to make the extrapolation that if one cat made it 6 years and did all this damage, we would have a much larger figure in the city of Pasadena than 65,000, which is a figure that represents both cats and dogs. So I would suggest that anecdotally that figure is questionable.
Well, and something to address that as well is when we're talking about cats, there's the question of owned cats and unowned cats. The numbers for owned cats is approximately 33,000. Those are owned cats living in homes. And then there's the additional cats that we don't have statistics for, which are the unowned cats. So when you go, for example, to, I believe there's a feral cat issue at some of the where the power poles go through Pasadena. So those are uncounted.
Okay, so just to be totally clear, so all of us are playing from the same sheet of music. The 65,000 that's represented on page 3 does not represent an estimate of all cats and dogs that exist in the city of Pasadena. Those are the ones that you are suggesting that are in homes. And we know that figure by virtue of licensure?
No, that figure is based on a formula that is based on the population. And that's because the licensing program is new to us. We're at about 30% compliance based on the statistic. And that's the only way we can estimate the population. There is no census for animals, so we
Okay.
have to go by a formula.
But by virtue of what you just shared with us, it would not include those outside of a residence, if you will.
Those that do not have owners, so your feral cat population that you will often find just in empty areas.
Okay, well, thank you.
I think that completes the pre-public comment questions. Oh, Victor, was your hand in the air?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you. I just had a quick question regarding the canvassing. Report states you're nearly complete with the canvassing of
Yes.
of the city. The 65,000 dogs and cats in the city, how did you come about that number? Is it through the canvassing?
No, again, that's the formula that we extrapolated from the American Veterinary Medical Association.
Okay, so I'm interested in the numbers that resulted from the canvassing, because if there are in fact 65,000 dogs and cats in the city of Pasadena, and we've netted, if I'm reading this table correctly, or we've got new licenses of 3,500 or so, 3,548, how successful are we being in the canvassing program? Are we seeing more and more people actually register their dogs?
We are seeing an increase in compliance. At first, it doesn't seem like that because we had to clean up those that we're still getting, that we had on the books, that we had to go through and find out, okay, whose dog has passed and cleaning up, or who's moved out of Pasadena and they were still on the books. So after that, we are seeing an increase, and every animal that is coming through our shelter, we also have the opportunity to license, and because we are doing the licensing as well, our field officers are also able to increase the licensing.
I understand all that, but
Yeah.
I'm interested specifically in the results of the canvassing. You don't have to have the numbers now, but I'd be interested to know, maybe as part of the city manager's green sheets, to know how effective the canvassing program has been, and what the net new licenses are as a result of the canvassing program. Not to be critical, I'm just interested to know what those numbers are.
Yeah, and that's something, once we finish canvassing the whole city, that we'll be putting together and report back to the city to talk about the success of the program and where we see we can grow the program even more.
Okay, thank you.
Turn to public comment, and may I mention to the council that we have nearly 50 cards awaiting for public comment. I'm going to suggest that we think in terms of up to 2 minutes per witness in regard to the testimony that might be taken in the course of the next couple of hours. And if that seems reasonable, we'll start the process with the first persons to speak. There are 48. And a half.
We could do 90 seconds.
Okay. 90 seconds, and I would urge, I know that feelings are strong on this subject. It's important that each person, as they have the opportunity to speak, be given full attention and full respect of the audience. and then that would be true for each and every person. I think we'll all feel good about that opportunity to testify.
Mayor, I'd be, as the speakers come forward, I think it would be helpful for me to know whether they support the actual recommendation that is in the staff report. There is no recommendation for any breed-specific action on the part of the council. The recommendation that's before us is merely to establish a fee differential, and so I'll be listening for that specifically, not necessarily something that is not in the staff's recommendation at this point.
Is there interest on the part of the council to know if the speaker is from this city, list a residence in this city or outside the city? Yes. We turn to Sarah Bixler and then to Florence Bleacher.
In the cities, Mayor.
Ms. Bixler is from Pasadena, according to her card, and Ms. Bletcher is from Los Angeles, West Olympic Boulevard. Ma'am?
Greetings. I've lived in the city of Pasadena for almost 34 years. I am against it because I feel like we can have the residents of Pasadena do the same thing. I have been, and other residents of the city of Pasadena, my neighbors, have been paying for spaying and neutering ever since I've been here. 30 years ago, I had a feral cat dump a litter of kittens on me. I placed the 3 males, I spayed the female, and then unfortunately she came back. She dumped another litter of kittens on me. That time I took the kittens down to Long Beach No-Kill Center, and then I spayed the mother, so that was sort of the end of that. Fast forward 6 years, I caught a feral female. I had her spayed at the Pasadena Humane Society. It was free. I took her back. I had to take care of her. I had to feed her. Well, I put food on a table. Unfortunately, the skunks came. They could not get on the table. The possums could get on the table, and so could this really big raccoon. And so I let the raccoon eat. Anyway, that's been my experience. My experience, and myself and my neighbors have spayed and neutered other cats of neighbors as well as feral cats in the area. So, we're done? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bleacher?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you again. I'm with the California Responsible Pet Owners Coalition. You all have copies of our letter. In that letter, I quoted extensively from the Fix Austin blog, who is against mandatory spay and neuter ordinances because they are ineffective wherever they have been tried. Thank you also to the council people who recognize the lack of credulity of the statistics cited in the staff report. They're ludicrous. Unfortunately, also, early spay and neuter in animals has lots of adverse physical effects. UC Davis, in conjunction with the Golden Retriever Club and the AKC Canine Health Foundation, did a study on juvenile spay and neuter. Animals are experiencing increased rates of cancer, increased problems with structural health, increased temperament problems. Also, the statistics on bite prevention as a result of early spay and neuter are inconclusive. So much of the staff report I would question as being poorly researched, unfortunately. Regressive laws do not work wherever they have been tried. Statistics have increased, and the health of the local animals has decreased. People become scofflaws because they're afraid of being caught by these regressive laws. So rabies vaccination goes down, animal care goes down. Also mentioned in the study, it states that mandatory spay and neuter will reduce owner turn-ins. However, in our still poor economy, people are turning in dogs because they can't afford to spay and neuter their animals. How will this increase?
Ms. Bleacher, would you bring your
it?
statement to a conclusion?
Thank you for the opportunity, and please question the reports because they're not credible. Thank you.
The next card is from Marla Tosher from Pasadena.
My name is Marla Tauscher. Good evening, Council, Mayor. I am an animal attorney. I practice predominantly in the area of animal shelter law and animal control law. I want to make very clear, I'm not opposed to spay and neutering. But what I am opposed to is laws that have the potential to disproportionately affect lower-income people. And when you start to pass these kinds of laws without the infrastructure in place and without the possibility for low-income or for low-cost spay-neuter options, you really run into problems, and you run into problems that do have a disparate impact on your society. As I said, I'm not opposed to spaying and neutering, but this has not been effective where it's been tried. Laws are only as effective as their enforcement, but you can't enforce this in a way that's going to impact one group of society more adversely than another. And that's what's happening in a lot of areas. Look around at Riverside County. They're having a lot of problems right now. This is exactly the kind of thing that can land you in court. When you start to enforce these laws in a manner like they have been, they're having a lot of problems right now. So don't follow their model blindly off a cliff. It's not a good idea. I just don't know that you have the infrastructure here. I don't know that Pasadena Humane Society alone can provide the number of spay-neuter surgeries that need to be provided. I think this money and this effort would be much better spent on educating the public and on providing the resources, providing a voucher program, or something that will actually make this a possibility rather than punitive measures. They don't work. Thank you.
Jessica Lauren from Pasadena. And then Barbara Telesmanic from out of town.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Honorable City Council members. My name is Jessica Lauren, and I live in Pasadena. I do a lot of animal rescue work, and I see way too many cats and dogs that have been abandoned, neglected, or abused. There are tens of thousands of them on shelters and on Pet Finder. We owe it to them to help bring down their numbers and prevent any more suffering. I fully support an ordinance that requires the spaying and neutering of all cats and dogs, and I urge you to not delay one more day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Barb Telesmanic, and I am from out of town. I drove 4 hours here from San Diego. I own 3 pit bulls, and I'm the co-founder of SoCal Pit Bull Team. My one dog buddy is a complex-rated certified therapy dog, the highest rank a therapy dog can achieve. I'm also a registered nurse and have a specialty certification in pediatric oncology. And part of what I do professionally is to describe and apply treatment protocols. Our oncology team explains universal standards of care to families when their child is diagnosed with cancer. We tell them that the treatment regimens are founded in evidence-based science, years of research by experts, and approved by review boards to produce best outcomes. Now, if we propose a treatment plan that had no basis in science, never been peer-reviewed, had no backing by any accredited medical organization whatsoever, and was actually proven to be ineffective, our hospital would likely lose its accreditation and our patients would seek treatment elsewhere. You're asking the public to ignore some of the most compelling studies done on dog bites and behavior in the past 3 decades. You're asking them to overlook experts from the American Veterinary Medical Association, which boasts 84,000 members and is a collective voice for the profession, who in 2013 published in their professional journal why breed-specific legislation is not the answer, or the National Canine Research Council, who in 2013 published the most comprehensive and intricate study of dog bite-related fatalities to be completed since the 1970s. It states that breed plays no significant role in fatal dog bites. You're asking them to overlook experts like Dr. Chris Irizarry, PhD, Professor of Genetics, Genomics, and Bioinformatics at Western University, who states that a pit bull is not a breed of dog. A dog that is labeled a pit bull is a genetically diverse group of purebred and mixed breed dogs with a variety of individual personalities and behaviors. It is impossible to apply breed traits regarding health or behavior to this genetically incoherent group of dogs. This pertinent and thorough data has clearly demonstrated that assigning dog bites to breed is considered unscientific and obsolete.
May I ask you to bring your statement to a close?
Sure. I just have 2 more sentences. Community-based approaches to dog bite prevention and holding all dog owners accountable to the same standards of care have been proven to be the most effective and recognized methods for decreasing dog bites and keeping communities safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Carol Hamilton. and then Jade Tan. Are you from Pasadena, ma'am?
Good evening. No, I'm not from Pasadena, but I train here. I belong to the Pasadena Obedience Club, and I show at the Pasadena Kennel Club shows. I also belong to the council, Obedience Council. I'm highly involved in obedience training. I also belong to the California Federation of Dog Clubs, multiple rescue groups, and breed clubs. You've heard the statistics. You've been given the statistics. Now you need to look at them in reality. First off, the bit about the cats, that came from HSUS, and they've been throwing that around for 10 years, and it's not accurate. Secondly, what you're doing by making mandatory spay-neuter is you are decreasing the number of purebred dogs. As a severe allergic patient myself, I am allergic to about 95% or more of the breeds. I can only live with a purebred dog. And I was a novelty as a child because I'm not 29. The kids today have a lot more allergies. There's many more of them that have that problem. But a few years ago, we had a little...
May I ask you to bring your statement to a close because the allocation tonight for each person is 90 seconds.
Okay, I wanted to give a real short story. A few years ago, we were engaged with AB 1634, Lloyd Levine. He's kind of disappeared because of that one. A young man came along and he wanted a button that I had that said, no AB 1634. I told him that he could have the button if I explained to him what it meant. And it was a mandatory spay-neuter law for the entire state of California. His father thought it was a great idea when I explained that that meant no dogs or cats.
How long will your statement?
No cats or dogs would be able to have puppies or kittens. The little boy thought about it and then said, and just where am I going to get my puppy when I'm old enough to get my own? Think on that. Your grandchildren are at stake. Oh, and by the way, maybe if some of our friends that were here from Flint Ridge had had a dog as a child, they wouldn't have needed a second chance.
The next speaker is Jade Tan. I believe from outside of Pasadena.
No, I am from Pasadena.
Pardon?
I am from Pasadena. Good evening, Council and everyone here. My name is Jade, and I am from Pasadena. I'm here to oppose MSN because I cannot bear to see my dog's breed, the Alaskan Malamute, one of the last 10 remaining American pure breed, disappear. 2, my dog Diesel is already 6 years old, happy, well-adjusted, and a majestic creature. Diesel will suffer long-term physical, mental, and emotional arrested development if he has to be castrated. 3, studies have shown significant problems with early spaying and neuter, and over 85% of the dogs registered are already spayed and neutered. This is additional tax that many people cannot afford. Therefore, I am urging Council not to pass MSN because it directly affects Diesel. And I think MSN is too general, and I think bad owners and irresponsible owners are the ones that needed to be spayed and neutered. Thank you.
The next speakers are Katie Ash from Los Angeles and Amy Meyer.
Hi, thank you guys for taking the time. My name's Katie Arth, and I just have bad handwriting, but I'm here to ask you guys to please adopt a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance for all dogs and cats in this community.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer?
Thank you very much for accepting public comment. I'm just here to say that I fully support a mandatory spay and neuter ordinance, and I hope that you will push this forward. Thank you very much.
Dana Keithley. Would you say you're city resident?
Yes, I'm from the city of Rancho Cucamonga. I'm actually a former shelter employee of the city of Rancho Cucamonga.
Thank you.
And I wanted to again address some of the issues that were in the Pasadena Humane Society report. I was actually just on the website for the low-cost spay-neuter program, and what's interesting is that what's already been in place is mandatory or low-cost spay-neuter for pit bulls and chihuahuas, the dog breeds that are coming in the most within the Humane Society. This program has already been in play for several years. Am I correct? Yes. So when you actually look at the report that was pulled by Pasadena Humane Society, when they're talking about their outcomes for 2013 to 2014, 2012 to 2013, which are the two breeds that are coming in the most? Pit bulls and Chihuahuas. Thank you. So again, mandatory spay-neuter. It is a great idea. Spay-neuter is important, but unless you are really going to have the infrastructure to help support these communities and the pet owners, it's not going to work. It already isn't working for your low-cost program for pit bulls and Chihuahuas. The demand is too high. It really is. That's why you need to focus your efforts on education, community outreach, and programs that are going to help owners keep their animals. Sometimes it's a matter of a couple $100. Somebody can't afford a surgery. But hey, they may end up having to give up their animal. Why not have an intervention program like Downtown Dog Rescue? That'll help these owners. Again, spay-neuter is great. It's important. And the people who got up here and were arguing against it for their breeds, if they had read the ordinance, you guys have already said breeders are exempt to it, which is a little silly, but, you know, let's take it one step at a time. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a card from James Krause, Pasadena, and Christina Cho, Pasadena.
Hi, my name is James Krause. I'm an owner of 2 pit bulls. I got them fixed at 5 months. They have no behavior issues at all. They're not suffering from any depression or anything like that. So any of that kind of talk about my dog's going to suffer from being spay neuter, it's just a load. I'm a big supporter of spay and neuter because there's a lot of backyard breeders out there. And we need to leave the breeding to the responsible people, which is the AKC, UKC. I mean, especially with pit bulls, you see a lot of backyard breeders. You could buy a pit bull off the internet for like $50 off of Craigslist. So we need to cut down on that. That's why I want an actual spay and neuter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Christina Cho, and I'm a resident of Pasadena. I'm here to support an ordinance that requires all cats and dogs to be spayed or neutered. There are too many unwanted animals in the city, and we have the ability to decrease those numbers. The only way we can reduce the number of animals who are suffering in abusive or neglectful homes and the number of animals who are dying in shelters is to prevent them from breeding. On that note, I would also like to say that the American Kennel Club does not deserve a seat at this table. The AKC is responsible for animal homelessness and the deaths of unwanted dogs and cats in shelters. They profit from suffering and have no business here. Pasadena must do its right for cats and dogs by mandating spay and neuter for all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hal Weiss and Miss Lisa Lang. Hal Weiss and Lisa Lang, both are from Pasadena.
Good evening. Thank you so much. My name is Lisa Lange, and I'm a resident of Pasadena. I live in a home that's been in my family for more than 60 years. And I've lived in other cities throughout the years, and in every city that I've lived in, I've volunteered for or I've donated to the local animal shelter. And I can tell you that what we have here with the Pasadena Humane Society is something we can be very proud of. We need to give the Humane Society, however, a leg up, and you have the power to do that by passing a comprehensive spay-neuter ordinance right away. But I would urge you to please go one step further. $60 for a licensing differential isn't enough. If you look at just one, conservatively, you look at someone who purposely breeds, say, a pit bull, and sells each pup for $200, which is on the low side. They will make $800 on a very small litter. We need to take away the incentive to breed dogs and cats, and a higher license fee will help do that. This sounds high, but it's not when you consider what we're dealing with. $5 or $0 for spayed or neutered animals, $1,000 if you want to breed animals and contribute to the problem, the overpopulation crisis. Simply put, breeders are killing shelter dogs' chances at a good home. If animals are paying with their lives, the very least breeders should do is pay monetarily for their deaths. Thank you.
Is Mr. Hal Weiss in the chamber?
Yes.
Mr. Weiss?
Hi.
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Hal Weiss, and I live in Pasadena. I support an ordinance to require the spaying and neutering of all cats and dogs. It is the only way to prevent animal homelessness, but it's also beneficial for public safety. As you've heard already, unneutered male dogs are far more likely to attack, and unfortunately, it's usually children who are the victims of these attacks. When kids are attacked, it's also more likely to be a catastrophic injury. So making sure that all dogs, not just pit bulls, are neutered is going to help keep our communities safer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speakers would be first Adam Miller from outside Pasadena and Tracy Remar from outside Pasadena. Mr. Miller?
Hi, I'm Adam Miller from Los Angeles, and I support a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Remar?
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Tracy Ryman, and I live in South Pasadena. And I'm here actually to represent PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and our many thousands of members, and our several thousands of members who live and work in the Pasadena area. We thank you for considering passing this vital ordinance. It is a long overdue life-saving measure for Pasadena's homeless animals, and we urge you to vote in favor of it without delay. The fact is that each and every dog and cat bred and born, on purpose or by accident, and every animal bought from a pet store or breeder often means a death sentence for an animal in an animal shelter or a foster situation, sitting hoping for a home that never comes. Santa Cruz County passed a spay-neuter ordinance in 1994, which at the time the county's animal shelter took in approximately 8,500 cats and dogs annually, and 50% had to be euthanized. Just 2 years after the law went into effect, intake numbers were down along with the euthanasia rate, and they have continued to drop. As of 2008, 4,800 animals were taken in. That's down essentially half of the pre-legislation number. And the euthanasia rate had decreased to 29%. The county also reported a decline in dog bites as a result of the ordinance. We strongly recommend that citizens who insist on keeping intact animals be required to pay $1,000 with those funds funneled into a dedicated spay-neuter fund for low-income individuals so as to reduce animal homelessness and reduce Pasadena's animal sheltering and disposition costs. So please, I hope that you will vote in favor of this ordinance right away. Thank you.
This card is from Marie Lang, and then there's a card from outside Pasadena and another from outside Pasadena, Alicia Wampner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Marie Lange from South Pasadena. I'm a long-term owner of property in the city of Pasadena. I urge you to pass an ordinance to spay and neuter dogs and cats for obvious reasons that have been stated here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
I ask you to do it immediately. Thank you.
Alicia Wampner.
Good evening. My name is Alicia Wampner. I live in neighboring Glendale, and I am here in support of a mandatory spay-neuter law. Thank you very much.
Christina Sewell from Los Angeles.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking public comment. I just want to say that I am in full support of a mandatory spay and neuter ordinance. Thank you very much.
Jennifer Parrish, Pasadena. Rochelle Owen, Los Angeles. Ms. Parrish?
Good evening. I've been a resident in Pasadena for 9 years. I live in District 5, and I'm in full support of the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Ms. Owen?
Good evening. My name is Rochelle Owen, and I'm just here to say I'm in full support of a mandatory spay and neuter ordinance. When you look at the amount of animals entering shelters and who have to be killed and euthanized because of these overpopulation numbers, it only makes sense to make this mandatory spay and neuter. Thank you very much.
Kenneth Montville from Los Angeles, Mr. Montville, and then Lauren Tomanich from Los Angeles.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. I just want to voice my strong support for a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance. As a city, as a county, as a state, as a country, we're facing an issue where millions of animals are entering shelters annually, and half of whom are being euthanized. And mandatory spay-neuter ordinance is really the only way to systematically root out that problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for taking public comment. I just want to say I also fully support the mandatory spay and neuter ordinance. Thanks.
Mr. Liddy, Josh Liddy from Pasadena.
Yeah, I do not support the ordinance. I really don't understand why we're here. In 2012, it was BSL, which didn't make it out of Public Safety Committee. That turned into mandatory spay and neuter for all dogs in 2013, which you guys rejected. Then it turned back to pit bulls and BSL again, which you guys overwhelmingly rejected again, but didn't take a vote on it. Instead, tabled it, which that's neither here nor there, I guess. And now we're back to mandatory spay and neuter for all dogs again, less than a year later. But it's really coming out of the pit bull thing. Councilman Madison gives examples of attacks from around the state and the country, but then asks everyone for their home addresses who opposes his agenda. As to disqualify them in their point of view if they're not from Pasadena. I've seen him taking notes who's from and who's not from Pasadena here. To that point, BSL bounces around municipalities here in California. All Pasadena has done is take the Riverside County ordinance and attempt to bring it here. Who's to say that another city wouldn't piggyback off Pasadena, whatever they decide to do, BSL or mandatory spay and neuter? It's a relevant issue for all dog owners, especially since the council actually instructed the mayor to try to change the state law that prevents breed-specific legislation. I'd also like to point out that everybody wearing a yellow sticker here is affiliated with PETA. They're not self-identifying, but their ideology is the end to all pet ownership in the United States, so of course they support mandatory spay and neuter. And lastly, Madison will probably bring it up, but this is Presley, who was the dog that was actually involved in the attack 2 days after the January City Council meeting. And I know I'm red here, but I just want to get this out. This was one of the 3 dogs. He's the surviving dog. 2 of them were shot with a shotgun by cops and ended up dying on the scene. This is the surviving dog who was rescued, and he's an amazing dog. And the media said that 3 dogs were dragging someone down the street, but yeah, the guy didn't even have any injuries and declined medical treatment. So just keep that in mind when we're talking media versus reality. Thanks.
I have a card from Sarah O'Day outside Pasadena, and then Ashley Lomain.
Hello and good evening. Thank you, City Council and Mayor, for listening to us all speak. I'm excited for the steps that Pasadena is taking regarding spaying and neutering of all cats and dogs. As a volunteer of the No Kill LA Animal Shelter and Best Friends, I know all too well how many animals are looking for forever homes. I myself have had several pit bull fosters, and without fostering, our shelters are just overflowing, and I feel that spaying and neutering of all cats and dogs is the best solution for this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashley Lomelin.
Hi, I'm Ashley Lomelin. I own 3. They were all rescued from the streets. One only a few days away from being put to sleep at only a month old. All unwanted from full shelters. And I just want to say I fully support the mandatory spay and neuter ordinance.
Thank you. Diana Lannis. Ms. Lannis. Tony Beach. Outside Pasadena?
What?
Outside Pasadena?
No, I've been in, I want to say Pasadena's a pretty nice place to live. I hope you forgive me because I have speech impediment. I've been here since 1964, and now I'm homeowner here. So I'm really happy with being in Pasadena. I think this whole thing, like Josh Ed was going back and forth too many times, I think it's time to drop it. The whole state pretty much voted their conscience and got rid of AB 1634. I don't know why it's coming down to city level. 1 out of 2 families in this country now has a dog. I think if you're going to try spade and neutering with everything in each individual city, that's going to go down. And like you said, where are the dogs going to come from? Going by your numbers, there was 31,120 dogs in Pasadena. 87% have already altered. 253 found their way to PHS this year, 2014. 1724 were returned, rescued, or returned to the owners or adopted. That left 529. Of those, 283 were euthanized. These are according to your numbers, and I don't know how after what I heard today, I don't know how dependable they are. Of those, 149 because they were a bad behavior, and 76 because they were sick. That only leaves 58 dogs. Why are we doing this for 1 year for 58 dogs? I think also if you, I've got all I want to say, except I want you to read the letters. Before I came today, I looked at your website, and you had 33 positive. Do not support this, and not 1 negative. Support this.
Thank you. This card is signed Mr. L.
Hi, I just wanted to have an opportunity to say that I believe that
Would you state where you live, sir?
Yes, Pasadena. And I would just like to say that I believe this is unconstitutional, what they're doing here, because this is something that happens in a person's home and in a person's house, and that the government has no duty to go into their houses. What we have a problem with is the stray dogs that are out in the streets, and that's dangerous. And so we need to know how we can make them aware of the problem and how we can make them recognize what the situation is so that they will do it voluntarily to the people that want to, and the people that don't want to, then they can be aware of the circumstances and the consequences to those actions.
Thank you. This card is from Mark Friedman. And then from outside Pasadena, and this is from Allison Voringer, outside of Pasadena.
Good evening, Council. I'm actually here for a friend, even though I'm a dog owner myself. She's comes to a lot of dog shows in Pasadena over a number of years, and she'd called me today. She says, Mark, when we go out to Pasadena, they're having a meeting out there about an ordinance about spade and neutering. I was not familiar with this issue at all, but as a good friend I am to her, she said, well, if I bring my dog to Pasadena to a show, am I going to have, she has 2 Tibetan Mastiffs. He said, they're going to come into town and have to be, go through the process. A little bit scary. I'm just sitting here listening to the comment on both sides of the fence. And certainly, Mr. L., who just left here, I kind of listened to him pretty closely. And the idea of putting an ordinance together, I think it's the owner's responsibility, and I think it should be looked at a little bit different. Naturally, as far as the Humane Society, which is humane, you want to give those dogs that are in shelters an opportunity to get into families. But I think this should be looked at a little bit closer. Those dogs are strayed. Certainly, I think that they're on the street and, should be spayed and neutered. But as far as it should be the owner of a dog, whether or not they want to spay or neuter their dog, like this gentleman had said. So just wanted to listen to the whole evening. It was a pleasure listening to all you people and what you had to say. It was an enlightening experience across the board, and I'm glad I came out to see Pasadena. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Voringer. And then Luis Espinosa.
First, I wanted to state that I'm here in opposition of any sort of mandatory spay-neuter. And like Josh said, the people here from PETA, their end goal of PETA has been stated to be to totally eradicate pet ownership, which is why they euthanize about 97% of their intake in animals consistently. As a member of the Pasadena Obedience Club, I help out with the classes. I'm around dogs that are fixed, not fixed, purebred, mixed breed, just about everything. And in the classes, people come because they want help training their dog. They want help with their dog for various reasons. In one of the recent classes, a dog came in that was highly aggressive, and by the time it left, it was not. Not because it was intact or because it was fixed, but because the people didn't know how to deal with it, and not because people were irresponsible, but because they were responsible and they found an option on how to train their dog. The biggest problems with aggression and this supposed overpopulation isn't with dogs that are intact. It's with people that are irresponsible, people that don't want to train their dog, don't want to make sure that their dog is kept in the yard, don't want to do any of these things. Personally, I adopted a dog that was fixed. He was highly aggressive. About 2 weeks ago, he got his advanced canine good citizenship because we worked with him, we trained him. It's not a matter of being intact or not. It's a matter of responsibility and the consequences of being irresponsible.
Mr. Espinosa from Arcadia.
Council, good evening. If you are typical American, you own a dog. Most likely, you will own a golden retriever. What we are not talking about, and that's what these ordinances fail to do, is responsible and irresponsible dog ownership. What they do in Canada is mandatory to chip all animals. If that animal is found wandering around, is picked up by the Humane Society, returned to the owner, and charged $50. The coffers in Canada are overwhelming. They have superb facilities. None of these mandatory ordinances are in place, and we continue to fail to address positive reinforcement to dog ownership. All of us here are responsible dog owners. That's why we're here. Irresponsible dog owners are not present, and they're not in the gallery. We're all passionate about animals. That's what we're advocating for them. We want the best for them, but we also want the best for us and our experience. We have all experienced that, from little kids to grown-ups. There are many, many stories where people in their deathbeds bring a smile when they bring a dog. Please consider that this is really a responsibility of us to consider other options, including responsible dog owners. Thank you, gentlemen.
Jennifer Roberts from outside Pasadena, and Cindy Chick.
I'm Jennifer Roberts from Arcadia, also a member of the Pasadena Dog Training Club, the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel Club of Southern California, and a group called Concerned Dog Owners of California. Let me first say that the gentleman from the Humane Society said that over the past 30 years, voluntary spay and neuter has been successful. So why do we need mandatory if it's been successful? Perhaps it's because the animal shelter is in the business of selling dogs. I tried to get a dog to adopt from the Humane Society, and it was going to be $400. So they sell dogs, and perhaps because there aren't as many to sell, we need to have a new ordinance that will charge dog breeders big fees. I agree with the last speaker who said, why are we penalizing responsible breeders with higher fees when irresponsible people who are dog owners will continue to be irresponsible regardless of the fees, if there is a fee, if there is not a fee, if the fee is $1,000 or if it's $50. If they're irresponsible, they are going to be irresponsible. I would suggest that when the Concerned Dog Owners of California did a survey about why dogs are in the shelter, the majority were turned in by owners who, one, couldn't afford the vet bills, and two, had lost their job or were downsizing where they lived and had to turn their dogs in. It's unfortunate that that happens, but I don't see big bunches of dogs running the streets in my city, and I don't see them in Pasadena when I come here. I've attended the Pasadena Kennel Club shows for the last several years, and I would hate for your community to lose that over something like this. Thank you.
Chick?
Hi, my name is Cindy Chick. I live in the city of Pasadena. I am against mandatory spay-neuter. I know that when you're looking at these ordinances, what you're trying to do is have a positive effect on the community, but I don't think you've got a winner with this one. I think this one is unnecessary, I think it's ineffective, and I think it has the potential to be harmful to pets. And I know that's not what you want. First off, is it unnecessary? If you look at the statistics in the staff report, I'm really surprised because it shows Pasadena Humane Society has been very successful at getting a lot of people to spay and neuter their dogs. So you have 13% of dogs coming in that are euthanized, and of that 13%, most of those are either have behavior problems or they are ill. So what they're doing is they're successfully taking these dogs in and they're successfully rehoming the rest of them, which I think is exactly what we want. I think they should be commended for that. So, but I think that makes this actually unnecessary. I think they've done a great job. I think this is a very ineffective law. I think it would be very difficult to enforce it. I think what you will end up with is people no longer licensing their dogs if they ever did. I think that I don't know how it's going to prevent dogs from roaming. That is irresponsible dog ownership. I have an unneutered dog, and I assure you he does not roam because I do not let him roam. He's not allowed to. So it really does come back to the owners and the responsible dog ownership. I don't think that there is I haven't seen any evidence that altered dogs are less likely to bite. I think that there's actually a lot of research that can go either way on that. So, you know, I don't know that just because a dog is unaltered, I think that that's not necessarily the case, that they are going to be more aggressive.
Ma'am, would you bring your statement to a close?
Yes. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is the idea of altering these dogs before they are mature, at 6 months of age. That there are lots of studies that show that that is not healthy for the dog. And again, to me, that this is the most important thing. You've got incontinence, you've got hip dysplasia, you've got cancer. There are a lot of things about neutering a dog before it's sexually mature. And I don't think that that is really what the City Council is after. So you have
Ma'am, may I ask you to complete your statement?
Yes. The city has a handle on pet overpopulation. I don't think these laws are going to help vicious dogs, roaming dogs, but I do think you need to enforce the laws that currently exist. But don't pass a law that can be...
Please complete your statement.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Susan Van Luchen from outside Pasadena, and then Dana Bleifer from Pasadena.
I'm representing the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel Club of the United States. We are the oldest breed club in the United States.
outside of AKC. And the reason that I'm here is to reinforce what all of these good people who oppose your ordinance have to say. I don't know what the council would like to hear. I could answer almost anything if somebody like Mr. Kennedy has any questions. I thought you were most articulate in your questioning. I'd be happy to answer that. I'm just offering that instead of a canned statement. Otherwise, I can tell you that it is really detrimental at 6 months of age to neuter or spay an animal, particularly from a responsible owner. The original mandatory spay-neuter laws, as we have heard of them, were originated by a veterinarian who was the former president of the California Veterinary Medical Association, Dr. John Hemmel. And he is horrified to see where this has gone. Because when he helped devise these, he was thinking of dogs that were roaming the streets. He was thinking of dogs that were not responsibly bred. He certainly wasn't thinking of everybody's dog who had a responsible owner, because the health consequences to dogs are too dire. As was mentioned previously, I don't think anybody's hit on the growth plate issue. A dog's growth plates are not fully closed, and they need hormones to do this until they're 18 months of age. It does vary from breed to breed. But what this means is we can have problems with hip dysplasia. We can have problems with injury.
Ma'am, will you bring your statement to a close?
Also incontinence in females. And this law would be unequitable to responsible owners, and also to people.
Ma'am, may I ask you to bring your statement to a close?
And it also would penalize people without means. And it will actually mean fewer dogs are registered. Fewer dogs, that's less money and less results. It'll all go underground. You do this and it'll go underground. Thank you.
Dr. Bleifer?
Hi, I'm Dana Bleifer. I'm a property and business owner in Pasadena. And I do want to talk about the issue of animal welfare. There is a growing body of medical evidence to suggest that spay and neuter, particularly early spay and neuter, may be medically detrimental to mostly the research has been in dogs. A recent study published in the February 1st, 2014 Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association, looking at 2,500 Vishlas, showed across the board an increase in all kinds of cancers in dogs that were spayed and neutered, particularly in the younger spayed and neutered group, and also an increase in fear-based behaviors. There was a study a couple of years ago at UC Davis that showed similar results with not only cancer but orthopedic disease, hip dysplasia, cruciate ligament injuries, because we're altering the nature of the animal. An ordinance like this is going to affect the responsible people. They're the ones that are going to potentially want to follow the ordinance, and they're the people that are educated enough to be able to look at what's best for their pet and make a responsible choice. It's not an ordinance that's going to affect the stray, spay, and neuter population, where the problem really exists and where the efforts need to be focused.
Mayor, can I just ask a point of clarification? Is the current speaker a veterinarian?
I'm a veterinarian, yes. 23 years, UC Davis graduate.
Thank you very much.
Joel Eldap from Los Angeles, and Toby Sheila Bloom from outside Pasadena. Sir?
Hi, good afternoon, or rather good evening. I'm from Los Angeles, Eagle Rock neighborhood specifically. I train my dog at the Pasadena's Obedience Club. I have 2 dogs, a pit bull and a puggle. My concern is that the unintended consequences of this ordinance, I'm against it. The unintended consequences of this ordinance are that you're going to drive pet owners into the shadows, underground. As it is, you have only 30%, less than a third of your dog population in the city licensed. So if you put out a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance, you're going to drive people underground because you're going to be afraid the media is going to go crazy on this ordinance, and you're not going to have even fewer people coming out to register their dogs. That's my number one concern. My second concern is that this report has a lot of statistical concerns. The canvassing effort by the Pasadena Humane Society is very unclear what their data show, as some of the council member asked questions about. And the data that's presented here is also very concerning about the extrapolation for the cats. So I have concerns about this report. I think you should not rely on this report, and as a result, you should not pass this ordinance. And finally, I really do think it comes down to education. You need to focus on the owners who are irresponsible. That's where you need to put your money. That's where you need to put your resources, not on putting a mandatory requirement for mandatory spay-neutering. You already have excellent programs in place in the city that are obviously doing a very good job of spaying and neutering your dogs. Why make something mandatory that doesn't need to be in place? You need to focus your resources on stray dogs and owners who are not responsible. That's where you need to put your efforts on.
Toby Bloom, if you please, and then Gail Katz.
Good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Toby Sheila Bloom. I am a member of the Orange Empire Dog Club. I am the president of the Los Angeles Doberman Pinscher Club. We do hold our shows at Brookside Park in Pasadena every year. I am also the Doberman Pinscher Club of America legislative director. Based on that, well, I've done many hours of research. And since Dana already explained the problems with early spay and neuter as far as health is concerned, the research that I have done is on how many dogs go underground, how many people do not register their dogs, get licenses. When you don't get a license, you don't go to the vet, you don't get rabies shots. Now you have a new problem. And especially in an area like Pasadena that does have a lot of raccoons. And raccoons do carry rabies. Mandatory spay and neuter does not work. It did not work in Santa Cruz, and it will not work in Pasadena. It is not working in the city of Riverside. It is detrimental to the being of the dogs and the responsible ownerships. They take care of their dogs. They go ahead and they license them, but we don't spay and neuter them because of other reasons. I thank you for your consideration, and obviously I'm opposition to mandatory spay and neuter.
Thank you. Ms. Gail Katz from outside Pasadena and Nancy Reardon.
Hi, I'm Gail Katz from San Marino, California, and I've lived in San Marino for 25 years. I'm a nurse, and I've worked at Huntington Hospital for quite a long time. I'm the president of the Pasadena Obedience Club this year, Pasadena Obedience Club, but I also do rescue, and I have always licensed my dogs in Pasadena, whether they have been neutered or unneutered. I have a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel that I do obedience with, and I have a German Shepherd that I do Schutzhund with. One is neutered and one is not neutered. I believe in choice. I believe that responsible pet owners and pet people like myself that do multiple things with their dogs, everything from conformation to obedience to rally to Schutzhund, should be able to be responsible, and so therefore we don't need this rule. So I'd like to just say thank
you. Ms. Reardon?
My name is Nancy Reardon. I'm a resident of the city of Pasadena, and I strongly oppose this ordinance. I think it is going to be ineffective, it is going to be draconian, and it is going to unfairly burden responsible dog owners such as myself, who, contrary to what the animal rights fanatics would have you believe, in fact take very good care of my purebred dogs. As a matter of fact, I just spent $350 having my dog's hips x-rayed to ensure that I would not breed a dog that would have hip dysplasia or produce puppies that would have hip dysplasia. So this notion that people who breed dogs are in it for the money is ludicrous. I would also like to reiterate Nobody makes money responsibly breeding and selling purebred dogs. I would also like to remind the council that as regards unwanted dogs, it seems odd to me that if we have such an overabundance of unwanted puppies, why, according to the Centers for Disease Control, do we import into this country 300,000 puppies a year that come into this country without adequate documentation as to health, vaccinations, and the other kinds of safeguards that come when you get a dog from a responsible breeder or from a rescue organization. 300,000 puppies a year to populate shelters to provide quote-unquote rescue opportunities for people who really just want a nice puppy. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole Brickman from outside Pasadena. Claire Hoffman.
Hi, I'm Claire Hoffman. I live in Pasadena in District 6. I teach at Pasadena High School. I've been a member of the Kennel Club of Pasadena for about 30 years and Pasadena Obedience. And I think this measure, although we all promote, or we're all in favor of spaying and neutering when appropriate, I just think it misses the mark completely. Misses the mark completely. Many breeds are too young at 6 months of age to be healthily spayed and neutered. I think laws like this don't affect everyone equally. And I think education through our fabulous Pasadena Humane Society really needs to be the focus. We've really got to showcase that place more. I know for a fact that little outreach is done at the high school level, and when I talk with my kids in my classroom about the work that I do with dogs, they're fascinated, they're interested, and they learn from me about licensing requirements and stuff, and they teach their parents. And so I know if it weren't for my own personal bent that wouldn't be getting out there. And so we need to do more to integrate our children with learning about their animals, not putting out laws to kind of make people fearful of, oh, this is going to be, a mandatory thing. We also have such a diverse community. A lot of people in various cultures don't understand the good side of mandatory, or the good side of spaying and neutering at an appropriate age, or why you would need to or want to, and how to be responsible pet owners when a dog is intact. So I think we're just missing the mark on this one, and I oppose it strongly.
Thank you. Thanks. Elizabeth Hammond from outside Pasadena and Diane Prado. How about Ann Dove? Welcome.
Good evening, Council. My name is Diana Prado. I live in the city of Pasadena. So I just want to discuss that with mandatory spay and neuter, you're going to be spending money on enforcement instead of spending money on fixing the problem. And what the problem is that you need to educate, you need community outreach, you need low-cost spay and neuter, free spay and neuter, and not just low-cost and free spay and neuter, but accessible. So a lot of families that are low income don't have the accessibility to go to, let's say, the Pasadena Humane Society, so the accessibility of it. In regards specifically to the fee differential, Councilman Gordo, that you were stating, at the end of the day, I don't think it's about necessarily what is the fee differential. It's about the opportunities that the community has in regards to spaying and neutering their animals. As everyone was saying here, it's about responsible pet ownership. And I want also to take into consideration that the city of Los Angeles has mandatory spay and neuter, and they've had mandatory spay and neuter, and it's not working. And as Ms. Tauscher pointed out in Riverside County, how there's selective enforcement, there is selective enforcement going on currently right now in the city of Los Angeles. The low-income communities of South Los Angeles are being targeted by animal control, and what it leads to is the people relinquishing their animals. Luckily, there is Downtown Dog Rescue that has the intervention program, but we hear about this. This is happening at this moment. So if we look at just our nearby city, We know that it's not working. Mandatory spay and neuter isn't the way to go. And my dogs are spayed and neutered. I agree with spay and neutering, but forcing a community to spay and neuter their dogs, going into their homes and requiring that isn't the way. It's education, it's community outreach, it's providing accessibility and the resources for it. And lastly, I just want to say a quick point about trap spay for the cats, about trap, spay, neuter, and release. That is something that perhaps the Pasadena Council should consider in regards to the cat population situation. And mandatory spay and neuter isn't the only way to prevent homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura London from outside Pasadena and Rose Villegas from La Habra.
Good evening. My name is Ann Dove, and I'm a resident of Pasadena. I've volunteered at a shelter, been involved in breed rescue. I've also had purebred dogs from responsible breeders, and I do a lot of competing in a whole variety of dog shows, dog sports. I've also been bitten by a dog. I've also had 3 of my dogs attacked within Pasadena by a Labrador Retriever. Not a pit bull, go figure. But even with all that, I do not support this at all. If this would actually work, I might support it, but I think you've heard a lot of comments about why it's not effective. That being said, I wanted to point out 2 different things in the staff report that I think are sort of technical errors that need to be addressed even if this does move forward, which I hope it doesn't. One is to qualify as a competition dog to get the unaltered dog exemption. They need to compete within 365 days, the previous 365 days. But the issue is for certain sports and venues, they can't even compete until they're 12 months old for like lure coursing, 15 months for agility. So you have a lot of dogs that are going to be caught in this weird limbo where they're not complying, even though it seems like the intent is that they would be exempt. The other thing is enforcement. Under that section, it cites chapters 612 and 616 of the municipal code. Those deal with licensing and not picking up dog excrement and dogs running at large. But it doesn't address 618, which deals with nuisance dogs, including dogs with aggression issues. So I'm not sure if aggression and attacks is an issue that's trying to be addressed in this ordinance, why that's not included in here. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura London.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. My name is Laura London. I live in North Hollywood, and I'm a professional dog trainer. I work with Downtown Dog Rescue, Angel City Pit Bulls, Wags and Walks, and a number of Best Friend Coalition partners throughout Los Angeles. What I've found in Los Angeles mandatory spay-neuter with the South LA Intervention Program is that mandatory spay-neuter targets the people who don't have the resources. It targets the underserved. That Flint Ridge presentation today was awesome. And that was an underserved community that's like taking control. That same community is going to get hit with this. The number one reason people surrender their dogs is because they can't afford spay and neuter. And the reason they have to surrender them is because they get targeted by enforcement. And the ones who get targeted are the male dogs because you can see they're packing heat. You can't see if the females have been spayed or neutered, so you're just targeting male dogs belonging to poor people. Unintentional, unwanted, unsanctioned breeding is really where we need to stick our finger in the dam here. When people are selling puppies in Penny Saver and on Craigslist, to sell a dog, breeders, you have to have a license, right? You have to prove that you can sell the dog. If you're not licensed, this registered breeder, you better get a big fat ticket and spend some time in the pokey because you are out to make money and you're a backyard breeder and you're part of the problem. It's not the responsible breeders who are the problem. Fees of $60 more isn't going to stop. It's like $300 more in LA, and they just don't license their dog. They just don't do it. It doesn't matter.
Ma'am, are you close to the end of
I think I'm really close. Yeah, in general, I think spay neuter's great. You got to control the flow, but mandatory isn't the way to do it. Thank you.
Rose Villegas.
Yes, from La Habra. First and foremost, I want to commend
this council, I stood up here in January, several of us in this audience did, and when you were trying to pass a pit bull spay and neuter only. You listened and you changed it from pit bull to all dog and cat. So thank you for doing that. I'm on the fence on this, and if you look at my card, I wrote both. I am 100% for spay and neutering. I used to volunteer at Baldwin Park Shelter. I help transport for rescue dogs that they pull out of Downey Shelter now. I have 3 rescues of my own. So again, I'm totally for spay and neutering. It needs to be done. Problem I have is you have the Humane Society come up here. Last year you asked them to do canvassing. When I sat in this room in January, you said, Humane Society, come back in July with your canvass report. We're in July. You have no canvass report. You asked them for it at the beginning of when we started this spay and neuter thing. They don't actually have a real canvass report for you guys. So as far as I'm concerned, and what you guys should be concerned with, is everything they submitted to you, get a black marquee pin and just put a big fat X through it. It means absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. And quite honestly, I wasn't even going to speak before you until she came up here and couldn't answer your questions. They made absolutely no sense to me. But again, there was something that was in the presentation that caught my eye also, where it was brought up 280, I think it was 283 or 285 dogs were euthanized by the Pasadena Humane Society due to aggression.
Ma'am, your time has expired.
Okay, 30 seconds more. Sorry. The fact is, you can fix a dog. You're not going to end aggression. It's all about ownership, responsible ownership. And somebody mentioned selective enforcing. I will put $1,000 right now with you, Mr. Madsen. Your number one target's going to be pit bulls. Number one. If you guys pass this, it's going to be you going after pit bull owners. It's that simple. $1,000, okay?
Ma'am, have you completed your statement?
So again, I'm on the fence on
Would
you
you
guys
please
passing this or
complete
not.
your statement?
Okay.
We go to Joe Porter from Monrovia. Joe Porter, and then Veronica Ferrantelli from Pasadena.
Hello, I'm here mainly, I was here in January, and I was listening to Mr. Madison and his desire to get rid of the pit bulls. So that's why I came along with my 2 daughters. I'm very pleased that that is not what's going on tonight. I'm so up in the air about spay and neuter. All of my animals are spayed and neutered, and I think it's responsible. We're all responsible. But I think what we need to do is educate. We need to target the people that backyard breed. Mandatory spay and neuter, these guys said it, it's not the answer. I'm going to still do it. I do believe in it. I do rescue, and I'm a teacher. And as a teacher, if we could get the Pasadena Humane Society and all the cities to send educated people to the classes of these children and teach these kids so they can teach their parents on the importance of spaying and neutering and being responsible, that's what we need to target. The people that aren't here, the people that don't understand that when a kid comes to me, I'm a middle school teacher, and they come to me and say, Mrs. Porter, hey, I have 9 little puppies, isn't that great? And I tell them that's so sad, and they say, well, but why? You do rescue, you love animals. And I said, that's right. And I try to educate them why that just killed 9 animals out of a shelter. So we need to educate. That's what you need to start doing, please, is sending people to the little kids in our schools to educate them so they can educate their parents. Thank you.
Thank you. Ferrantelli.
First of all, thank you for bringing this to the attention. I think it's a really important cause. I'm Veronica Ferrantelli. I'm a homeowner of Pasadena. I'm a business owner of Pasadena, and I also founded a charity here in Pasadena. I also work in Riverside County where they do canvas, so I'm aware, and because of their progressive spay and neuter program and their involvement in their community, I decided to work out there. And I now represent a spay neuter clinic of 100 animals that I spay neuter. I want to thank you for bringing attention to this cause and bringing it on the table. So I'm aware of what happens, and the people that come up are low income, and I know that they need help. If we say mandatory, and I am for mandatory, because I'm the person who goes in the freezer and sees all the puppies filled, and there's 10 barrels every day refilled with puppies and cats, mostly cats and dogs and pit bulls, and they are not all aggressive, obviously, because they're puppies. So I'm all for mandatory, but we do have to offer it to the low income, and there are people like me and rescue groups that will do that. I only am a vet that charges me $60, and there's most veterinarians charge like $300 to $500. It's an important cause, and I think we have to regulate and make it so that if someone does have a litter and say, oops, I have a litter, we should have like $1,000 fine because they're just making money off of Craigslist and they just don't care. I live it. I see it. People come up to my clinics and with shoestrings on their little dogs. They want to be spayed and neutered. This is not about the breeders. They're responsible, but I don't want the blanket of the umbrella of the breeders to protect the gangster breeders, because they're just breeding their dogs aggressive and they don't feed them so they get more aggressive. I'm going to stop talking. But I live it and I know it, and the freezers are full, so I'm for mandatory until we can figure it out. What to do is right. But I thank you for bringing this to our attention. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. This card is from Michael Cornwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I was enjoying watching this at home, and it suddenly dawned on me, if I didn't come here and speak and you guys voted against this ordinance, I'd feel quite guilty. So I urge you to adopt the ordinance. Some of you know I live over on overlooking Defenders Park, and people are walking their dogs over there constantly, and it's a great spot for the people who are monitoring licenses to check out dogs. But I've heard a lot of stuff tonight that didn't make sense, just as I heard in the last two dramatic council sessions that discussed the issue. But fortunately tonight, we're only discussing spay and neuter, and I trust you all read the editorial in the Pasadena Star-News in January that made a very good case that cities should pass spay and neuter laws. And for that reason, there has to be a reason that the LA city and county laws requires all cats and dogs to be sprayed or neutered. That's LA city and LA county require all dogs and cats to be spayed or neutered. Why should Pasadena be any different? Do we know more than our erstwhile fathers? I mean, it makes no sense to even debate this issue. We're not talking about pit bulls. I have articles after articles about the dangers of pit bulls and how many people they've killed and what have you, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about spay and neutering. And in closing, just let me say that I heard one speaker say that this was prejudiced against the poor who cannot afford the procedures. This is sheer nonsense, as we know. There are many volunteer groups that will take care of that, and our own wonderful $20 million facility over there has a staff that does that every day. So I urge you to adopt the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. The public comment period on this matter is now complete, and we can look to the council for deliberations. What are the wishes of the council? Jackie?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question for the Humane Society, if they're still here. What is the budget, the current budget for the spay and neuter program at the shelter?
Our overall operational budget, which includes the spay and neutering, is about $7.5 million annually. For the spay and neutering, because it's on a sliding fee scale for the public SNP program, spay and neutering in Pasadena, that is a definite sliding fee scale for those that some people can't afford the full price, which is around $125 for a dog and $50 to $75 for a cat. It's all weight-based too, depending on the size of the animal because of the amount of medication and anesthesia that's involved.
And has anyone ever been turned away if they say if they bring their animal and want them to be spayed or neutered and they can't afford it?
Not that I'm aware of. If there's a financial issue, generally we can find some funding for it. As you know, we've been doing pit bulls and chihuahuas for free for a couple of years. But that's been on a voluntary basis only. It's for them coming to us, not us going to them.
And in the current duties of essentially all the staff and officers of the shelter, I'm assuming that they already promote spay and neuter amongst, as they come into contact with residents in the community and visitors.
That's our world. As the one young lady said, the freezers are still full, not only our shelter, but other shelters. I mean, animals are dying left and right because they're unwanted, abandoned, and uncared for because of irresponsible pet ownership and irresponsible backyard breeding.
And so how do you propose an irresponsible pet owner would choose to take care of, choose to get their pet spayed or
Well, the way the ordinance is drafted would be it's a secondary enforcement. So if the dog is impounded on one or two occasions, then definitely enforcement would take place to have that animal sterilized.
But that's the current practice anyway.
Well, no, it's not. It's not.
Well,
Current practice.
if the owner doesn't come, they're either euthanized or they're placed into a home.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Madison?
You have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up.
Steve, could you stay up at the lectern? Thank you.
One of the issues I'm struggling with, Steve, is the irresponsible breeder. I think that's an important issue. But I'm not seeing how we get at the irresponsible breeder and the issue of backyard breeding. I mean, are we just taxing the irresponsible breeders? We're not necessarily shutting them down. We're not doing anything but making it more expensive for them to continue with their craft. It's actually an exception to the rule. If you just pay $60 more, you can continue the practice. Isn't that correct?
Not really.
Well,
I'm not sure exactly how this works. The $60 and above figure for the licensing is to have a financial incentive for those individuals that will not have their animals sterilized to get it sterilized.
Right.
That's the responsible part. But as far as going after the irresponsible backyard breeder, that would be something that our officers, our field officers, would be looking into and handling. Because,
but help me out. Maybe I'm missing something, and this will help me out. But if you have an irresponsible breeder who just doesn't want to bring their animals into compliance with the ordinance, should the ordinance be adopted, they can remain out of compliance simply by paying the additional $60. Is that correct, or am I mistaken on that? Okay.
No.
So explain the $60 to me.
The $60 is for an animal that is not intact currently. If the ordinance passes, that is intact, excuse me. So if the ordinance passes, then it's going to be mandatory that if you have a dog or a cat that's over the age of 6 months,
existing,
that it be sterilized.
And how does that change with animals going forward? They won't be able to take advantage of the $60 exception. It's only for current or existing dogs at the moment.
It's only for current or existing, as far as I understand. Yes.
Okay, so it won't be an opt-out. It won't be taken as an opt-out provision
Again,
going forward.
Again, it's a secondary enforcement issue, just like LA City and LA County and Riverside County. And people, I think, have the perception that our officers are going to go door to door and start looking to see if the animal's been sterilized or not, and then start impounding the dogs or the cats. And that's not going to happen. It's a secondary enforcement activity.
Okay, I just want to be clear. Because, I'm sorry? It's not, I'm reading this report, and I'm reading the $60 fee as essentially an opt-out provision.
I see.
And
But that's not what it is. It's not a $60 opt-out.
Well, that's what I'm trying to clarify, is it's not a $60 opt-out. You're saying it would apply only, so this would sunset when?
I'm not quite sure on the date that we would sunset it, but
the $60.
It's once the process is passed and approved, or
It would apply to all dogs, apart from the accepted ones, the purebreds, et cetera. The $60 doesn't buy you the right to keep your animal unsterilized.
It does if it's current.
No, it just says that if you have an intact dog, when this ordinance passes, you're supposed to get it sterilized. What Steve is saying is that they're not going to go out and do a sweep and start gathering up all dogs. It's secondary in the sense if the dog gets picked up or there's some other issue, gets brought to the Humane Society, then the enforcement will be put in place. But the $60 is sort of irrelevant, frankly, because all it does is say that, it doesn't really opt out anything.
No, it doesn't.
It's just supposed to provide an incentive for law-abiding people to pay less and get it sterilized immediately, as opposed to paying more and when they get caught, then have it sterilized. But it doesn't buy you the right to keep your animal intact by paying $60 a year.
Mr. Madison?
Yes, it's Steve, if you could stay there. I think another important data point, just to stay on this $60 thing, is that's an annual fee.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so it's not, well, I can pay $60 one time and then keep my dog intact. It's now I have to pay $60, next year I have to pay another $60, the year after that, if I'm not secondarily enforced. Right. And pretty quickly then the calculation becomes, pardon?
Well,
that does make it an opt-out.
It's the reason it's not an opt-out is that it's not going to be enforced by a spay and neuter patrol. So I understand how you could see it that way, but if you have to compare it in your mind to somebody that, let's say, isn't even in the system, isn't even paying their licensing fees. That would only come up if the dog is impounded or encountered by our animal control and brought in, something like that. But it's still the...
I'm sorry, I'm still not quite following.
Well, I think it's just not maybe amenable to a label. I think what the ordinance says is that if you have a dog that's intact, it's mandatory that you get that dog spayed or neutered. We're not going to come and drag you and your animal kicking and screaming to the surgery. But when you license it, you're going to pay $60 more, and you're going to be told it's mandatory that you have spay and neuter. If you come back, you pay another $60, another $60, another. It becomes pretty punitive at some point, especially when the society's offering low-cost spay and neuter.
But 87% of the licensed dogs are already altered. Mm-hmm. So in fact, the number of people who bother to license their dogs, for the most part, are already they're already altered. They're complying already. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, the $60 issue would only be for someone who has got a licensed unaltered dog who wants to keep licensing their dog. Right. They're still in violation of the ordinance, but they're not going to get compelled to have their dog altered.
Well, but that's that.
Well, it is an opt-out.
So it is. If you keep
it's a half-baked opt-out.
Well, is it an opt-out to run a red light? because all that happens is you have to pay a $200 fine?
No, but look,
It's not an opt-out.
I know people who will say, fine, I feel very strongly about this, I don't want to alter my dog, I'll happily pay $60.
And that's unfortunate. And I know people who would run a red light because they have the $200 to pay every time. But just because we can't enforce the law, 24/7 doesn't mean we shouldn't make the same public policy statement that, frankly, all the right-thinking cities around us who've considered it have done.
I'm not arguing it with you, I just want to make sure I understand how the $60, how the differential works. And because I understand, excuse me.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we've had the benefit of your comments, and I think the 8 of us around the table, with the help of staff, are going to have sufficient difficulty reaching a conclusion. And I think we should limit the comments to that group of people. Margaret?
So just to, I hope, conclude on the $60 on the differential. So if you're responsible enough to be licensing your dog in the first place, likely you've already had your pet altered, because 87% of the people who license their pets, they're already compliant.
Right.
So if we haven't sort of caught them if they're not responsible enough to have complied, then it's only that 13% who, if they're so they're responsible enough to license their dog, then they can say, ooh, well, I'd rather go in and get a low-cost spay or neuter, and pay the low fee, or I'd rather pay $60 fee. They can choose. Is that right?
Well, in the same way that someone can choose to run a red light.
I know, but forget about the light.
Well,
Don't
no,
tell me about the light.
but you say
I
you
just
don't-
want to talk about the spay and neuter,
Well,
how it applies to this case.
I think you're right, Margaret. I mean, Steve, I don't think the light analogy works, because at some point, if you run enough red lights, your license will be taken away. Or that's the worst. The worst that can happen is you'll hurt someone or you'll get hurt. But there's a consequence to opting out on the red light. At some point, you build up enough points and your license is taken away. The question I have, and I hear Councilmember McCostin asking the same question, if year over year you just pay the $60, then it is an opt-out. If there's no consequence at some point, if we're going to have mandatory spay-neuter, then at some point it should be mandatory spay-neuter for everyone, not just for those who can afford to and are willing to pay the additional dollars, or the other way around, or accepting those.
I just want to understand that is the way I understand.
That's the way I'm reading
that
it.
It works.
If you are willing to and can't afford to pay the extra $60, then there is no mandatory spay-neuter.
Right. And I had one additional follow-up question for Steve while he was still here.
Sure.
Or were you still doing it?
Yeah.
About the low-cost spay and neuter, you were talking about, I guess I want to have a better understanding of the low-cost options. You said your large dog fee starts at $125?
Yes.
And then it goes downward, I guess, from there. So, and you also said you'll do them for free. So the range is between 0 and 125?
It's probably 0 and say 250. Somebody brings us a 145-pound St. Bernard, it's liable to be a $200 surgery.
What's the typical surgery?
The typical surgery is $100 to $125.
Oh, that's typical,
That's
not
typical.
the high.
That's typical, and that's still a really good deal for what you get, including the microchipping and I think the intent of the ordinance, though, is not to have the Pasadena Humane Society or any other enforcement body go out there and as Councilman Madison said, to start taking up animals. I mean, my gosh, we couldn't handle that. We don't want the influx of those animals coming to our shelter. But there's one common denominator in this audience all night, and it's been public education and outreach. And we've been trying real hard to do that. We do have a new education program in place with the new facility, and we have a lot of exciting things for the next planned out for the next few years. But it takes money to do that and to get the word out. And so I think the intent of the ordinance is to say, yes, if you're paying $60 for your current dog right now and it's unaltered, that's it, and you're a responsible person, go for it. But our officers see the litters of puppies and kittens that are out there continuously by the same individuals. And those are the people that we are after.
And so I guess my follow-up question, I'm sorry, Steve.
No, that's quite all
Madison.
right, please.
Oh, so I guess my follow-up question is, if we're already doing education, if we know who the repeat offenders are, and if we're already doing the dog licensing, why do we have to do them, or why should we consider the mandatory spay-neuter? Because the staff report is saying that there are no additional costs to the city and that enforcement of the ordinance will already be provided by the Humane Society under the existing services contract.
Correct. That's because we're wearing our animal control function contractual agreement hat at that point.
Right, but passage of this ordinance, according to the staff report, won't affect any of that. And by reason of what you just stated.
It's another tool that we can use as an enforcement body to help stop killing animals in public shelters. I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, we're tired of it, to be honest with you. We don't want to see any more animals killed because they're unwanted, abandoned, or abused, and so on. It just, I mean,
I think the problem is, and it's a fair point, Margaret and Victor and all of you that you raised, maybe we were just short-sighted in the $60 thing, because I think the transaction that is contemplated there is someone comes in, they don't know about the mandatory spay and neuter, their animal's intact, and then they're told, hey, Pasadena has mandatory spay and neuter. And you can get spay and neuter, or you can pay for your license. I mean, we don't want to turn them away without a license, so we'll sell you the license right now, but the law in Pasadena is you have to spay and neuter your animal.
But even without the license, even without the mandatory ordinance, don't you still advise customers whether they're intact or not, or when they're not intact, when they come in, that you advise them that, they should spay or neuter their animal?
yes. Okay. That's our platform. It has been for the last 30 years.
Wasn't that part of the canvassing event, canvassing effort also?
Yes, and we're not quite finished with the canvassing. It's taken us a lot longer than we anticipated because of the database and so on that had to be created and recreated and so on.
And what areas of the city are left for the canvass?
Elizabeth, what city are left? What part?
What areas of the city are left?
How can that be?
Okay, thank you.
Steve, have you had a chance to ask the question that you pushed the button about?
The only other question I had, and then I have a motion, Mayor, if you were amenable to a motion, to the making of a motion, is a number of the speakers indicated that the 6-month age is a problem, creates health consequences, and I just wonder if you could speak to that from your expertise.
Sure, I'm not a veterinarian, but I remember when Dr. Mackey, who started the early age sterilization program at 8 weeks, there was an uproar by the public, and that was like in 1987, 88, and now it's pretty much an accepted process. We look at it from a working with the masses standpoint, being involved in public animal control, and being responsible for the possibility of 35,000 plus dogs and who knows how many cats within the city. And so, again, early age spay neutering has always been on our forefront. It has been with a number, just about every shelter I know of, in the United States. So there's some debate, I guess.
Sure.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are asking you as attenders at this meeting to not participate in the discussion at this point in the process. Steve, And then there are others who haven't had a chance to speak who've been waiting. So we'll turn to Steve and then the next person on the list.
Well, I mean, I think we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think the right thing to do here, as our staff is telling us, as the Humane Society is telling us, as the city and county of LA has done, as numerous other cities have done, is to adopt this policy. Is it perfect? No. Will it result overnight in perfect compliance? No. But it's another tool and it's another message that we can send to address this problem. I took a tour with Josh, actually, and Josh and I don't agree on much when it comes to this issue, but we spent a morning together at the Humane Society, and I think the one thing we would agree on is there are a lot of animals there that end up getting put down. And that's really the issue that this seeks to address, as well as the benefits of adopting this policy. So I would move the staff recommendation, but perhaps with a proviso that the staff come back in a year and report on the fee differential, and if there's enough experience to tell us whether or not that's efficacious or not, or useless, or should be changed. We heard some speakers talk about a $1,000 fee differential. Apparently other cities have a much higher than $60 fee differential. We're not looking to exact fines or penalties from people. We want compliance, so that, as Steve said, he's got a beautiful facility there. And Elizabeth, who led our tour, I want to thank you too. We should be using more of the facility to saving animals and less of it to putting them down. And that's the goal. So that'd be my motion.
The motion has been offered. There's been no immediate second. The next person waiting to speak is Ms. McCaustin.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple more questions. So, just to be clear, maybe Steve, if you wouldn't mind.
Church.
Yeah. The question about the possible adverse effects of altering before maturity or at 6 months. So that is still, in some people's minds, open. I mean, everyone here tonight seems to agree that responsible owners have their pets altered.
Correct.
And there just seems to be some disagreement about whether 6 months of age is too young. So is the jury still out on that? I didn't quite get the answer.
My jury's not out, but apparently some of the audience is. That's something that if we do some more research, we can check into and see what's going on. But we've been doing this since 1985, and we haven't had any problems whatsoever. We have breeders that are spay and neutering at an early age, and they don't have any problems whatsoever. I don't know where it's coming from.
Well, I mean, I know our veterinarian recommended spay and neuter by 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I just was curious about that. Now, I do want to ask a question about the Canvas report.
Maybe Elizabeth can.
So you said in the staff report that since last year when we asked you to complete the Canvas, you said you've done almost 80% of the city?
Correct.
But you still have everything in this area, or just some in this area?
We have some of that area,
Yeah,
not the
couldn't
complete
be
area.
all
No.
of it, or you wouldn't have
No.
80%. So did you keep records on your Canvas? Do you have some facts and figures about how many homes you visited, or what report will you have for us?
When we complete the canvassing, we will have a report as to how many residences we visited, how many responses we got from each visit, how many new licenses
how many renewing licenses we've had through the canvassing, and in addition, we'll have how many new and renewing licenses we have through both of our adoptions and our low-cost vaccine clinics, because that's another opportunity for residents to license their animal.
Okay, and then if this ordinance is passed, will that provide another means of sort of measuring? Will we be able to measure the success of this ordinance, or you won't really know?
It will take a few years to see a measurement. Somebody brought up earlier our subsidized spay and neuter for pit bulls, and we've had that in effect for over 10 years. We've seen a reduction in our pit bull population, and we believe that is due to that. With Chihuahuas, we just started that 2 years ago, and so we really haven't had a chance to see the difference. It takes about 5 to 10 years to see the difference in population.
Okay, thank you. The question has come up about this could have the effect. This ordinance could have the effect of people just avoiding licensing altogether. Do you have any response to that?
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from, to be honest with you. I heard a lot about people going underground and so on. Maybe if they have something to hide, they go underground. I mean, when we first started with the pit bull problem in the mid-1980s, when the Pasadena Police Department was involved in helping us arrest those that were fighting the backyard fighters, and that's all kind of dissipated. And so I don't think people go underground. I think we have an opportunity to reach out and educate individuals, and I think that once something is enacted, I think we can work with the individuals. They're not going to hide, for crying out loud. I don't think so. It's not my. I haven't seen that. You know, people, I know some people, they don't want to buy a dog license because say it's too expensive or this or that. But then we talked about the benefits of it. You know, the fact that the animal is not going to be euthanized if it's licensed. It's going to be returned back to the owner immediately, and so on and so on. Once they see the benefit of the licensing itself, let alone the idea that it's a state requirement for rabies control, and that's why it's enforced. I don't think people are going to go underground. I really don't.
Thank you. There was this. Thank you. This is a question for staff. There was a question about, although there is the exemption for working dogs and dogs that compete in competition dogs, there was the question about dogs that are 1 year, let's see, clarify professional dogs in training exemption. So the way I read the staff report on page 8, dogs that were under 1 would still be exempt because their owner or custodian would be participating in this program. Would that provide the exemption, or is there a problem?
I was going to ask our deputy city attorney to respond to that question, since he's the...
Thanks.
So
yes, the exemption applies to, I believe what you're referring to are service dogs. Those are dogs that are currently being trained to provide some sort of comfort or actual...
No, that's not it. These are competitive dogs that might be involved in obedience, agility training, one of these, but they're, say, 1 year and they're unaltered. So technically, they should have been altered by 6 months.
Correct.
But they're not, they're in training, so to speak.
Right.
So
if they are in training, then they would be exempt. And then going back to whether or not they would be required to be licensed, that's when the $60 fee would kick in.
Okay, so...
An exempt dog would be...
Okay.
So therefore, even though they may be a service dog, they may, as long as the animal is unaltered, the $60 fee kicks in.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
All right, well, we've been talking about this for a long time, and we talked about this when I was on the Public Safety Committee, and I do think it's the responsible thing to do. I think all responsible pet owners spay or neuter their animals, so I'm happy to second the motion, but the $60 opt-out is just a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say regressive, it's just, I'm not sure I'm entirely comfortable with it, but I don't have a better alternative right now, and I do think we have to have something for people that, we may not catch them on the first round, really what that gets to. The $60.
Too high or too low? I haven't followed exactly.
Well, I mean, it's just, I guess I would leave it the way it is right now because I'm not entirely comfortable with it, so I wouldn't want to make it worse. Wouldn't want to make it more regressive. So I'd be interested to see when the numbers come back, how many people opt out. I guess we will get that information at some point. Is that right? Well, then maybe that's the time to take a look at it.
Mr. Kennedy?
Okay. For me, this is, and I would assume based upon the comments from the audience, a very difficult issue that various sides have thought very carefully about. And I respect all of the speakers and their comments, whether they live in the city of Pasadena or not. We are a welcoming city here. Also, as it relates to Steve McNall, and I don't recall your last name, Elizabeth, but I appreciate your participation in this effort. I do have a question for you, Steve. And it's a similar question that I asked at a previous time that you were here with council, and that is, was there in your economic pro forma related to either your operational budget or if there is debt associated with the wonderful new facility, that you factored in any of the potential revenue that would come from the possible passing of this particular ordinance? Or?
No, Councilman, we did not think about it, to be honest with you.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah, we're very fortunate and blessed that we have a community that really does support our organization. So,
absolutely.
But yes, we do have debt.
Okay. So again, Steve, this is a wonderful organization that I've personally benefited from. There are many in the community that, look at your organization with pride. I'm not convinced by the staff report, and I'll tell you why. One, the data that's reflected in the staff report doesn't seem plausible. And I'm speaking about the 65, the 70,000, et cetera. That makes it difficult if the data that's being shared with council is inaccurate to really use that as the foundational base upon which to make a decision. There was one veterinarian, I don't know if she is still here, but there possibly were at least two veterinarians that spoke, and one veterinarian spoke for the ordinance, and one veterinarian that I asked, and certainly I don't know, I don't think personally, I don't know personally, I believe any of the speakers, maybe I've met them through this process, but this particular veterinarian was not in support of the ordinance, though the particular veterinarian did say that she was in favor of spay and neutering, but not mandatory spay and neutering. So that's an issue for me as one council member to consider. And then I'm not convinced that if we were to pass this particular ordinance, that it would get to what we're attempting to achieve, which is the reduction in part of stray cats and dogs, and for some who have spoken, have included that certain dogs become less aggressive if they're essentially sterilized. Again, that's data that hasn't been convincing, and an argument that has not been convincing for this council member. What seemingly we all in the room can agree on is that education is critically important in this area. And I heard you, Steve, I heard numerous speakers on various sides of the issue talk about how important educating our community about spay and neutering is. And you have shared with us the programs that the Pasadena Humane Society has in place currently related to education, and you almost intimate that you would want to have even more of that, and certainly I think that is a way to deal with some of the issues that we're all concerned about. The unintended consequences of the ordinance as it's currently drafted could in fact favor one economic group over another economic group, and I'll tell you why. It's been articulated here around the dais, possibly better than I can articulate it now. For example, if you had a dog that lived between 10 and 14 years, if it lived 10 years, that would be $60 a year. That would be $600. And if you love your animal and you did not believe in spay or neutering, you simply just you would get a license possibly if you attempted to follow the licensure requirement, and over a 10-year period you just pay $600 because that animal is a part of your family. If it were 14 years, you just pay $60 over 14 years, and that'd be $840, which if I had a dog or a cat that was a part of my family and I didn't believe in spay or neuter, I'd just simply pay that because that's how important it is to my children, to my family. The animal becomes like a part or an extension of the family. So one could call that a discriminatory impact or disparate impact over one group over another group. So I don't think we've thought this through carefully. I think the agenda report as it is drafted leaves too many unanswered questions. Additionally, I believe that the council gave specific direction in a past iteration of dealing with this issue and one other issue, whether we wanted breed-specific legislation, which is a violation of state law. The canvassing has not been completed. And in my view, the canvassing is supposed to educate the policymakers around the dais. And if in fact the canvassing has not been completed, this seems to be premature to consider this tonight. And until the canvassing is done, at the very least, we should table this. However, I'm hoping that there are enough votes tonight to vote this agenda report down. The answers in reference to the development of the body, particularly on the dogs, the growth plates, has not been fully answered. We have not received expert testimony that would help us make a responsible decision. I can be convinced this particular agenda report is not convincing. And as I've said previously, because of the lateness of the hour, I'll just wrap up by saying I think the ordinance is premature. I was extremely convinced by the young lady who has, I think she said, 20 years of experience as a veterinarian, and she was in no way in support of the proposed ordinance as it's currently drafted. I thank you, Mayor, for this opportunity on this issue.
The next name on the computer screen is Mr. Gortho and then Mr. Tornick.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm struggling with this issue. I came here tonight thinking that that this was along the lines of a no-brainer, but I think this is a much more complicated issue than I initially understood it to be. I have some questions regarding some of the data. So, am I correct that on Table 2, 69% of the animals that we take into the Humane Society, 69% of cats and dogs, I should say, are strays? Is that correct?
From Pasadena.
From Pasadena. And so of that 69%...
And that's, I'm sorry, that's for dogs only. 57%
I'm
are
sorry,
cat.
thank you. Okay, so 69% of dogs, 57% of cats.
Correct.
Thank you. Now, of those animals, if they come in as strays, under this ordinance, would any of those animals be spayed or neutered once they're in the care and control of, as a stray, under the care and control of the Humane Society, would they be mandatorily spay-neutered?
Under state law, any animal that leaves the shelter into an adoptive home is spayed or neutered.
That's not my question.
I'm sorry.
I understand the adoptive part, but if they come in as a stray, are they mandatorily spay-neutered once they come in? Because I'm going to get to the next table where you have the outcomes, and that's Table 5 for live outcomes. But under this ordinance, if an animal comes in as a stray, and if in the data tells me 57% of cats and 69% of dogs, is there anything in this ordinance that, well, is there anything in current law or practice that would cause any of those animals to be spayed or neutered once they come in as a stray?
When they're in their stray period hold, we cannot do alteration on them.
Okay.
When they're through with their stray period, if we feel that they may be likely to be placed, sometimes we will spay and neuter them before adoption, but we don't automatically spay and neuter.
Okay, so there's nothing automatic?
No.
And there's nothing automatic in the proposed ordinance that would cause that either, is that correct? And staying with this same table, owner turn-in, 12% of the animals, of the dogs that come into the shelter are voluntarily handed over by their owner.
Correct.
And 17% of the cats are voluntarily handed over by the owner. What's the practice and what's the state of the law in terms of mandatorily spay-neutering those animals if they're voluntarily turned over?
It would be the same at the practice as the stray animals. Once we have ownership of them, if we feel we can place them, and we have the time, we will go ahead and pre-spay and neuter them before placement. Otherwise, we wait until placement to spay and neuter.
So you have discretion initially, but so does the ordinance make it mandatory, the proposed ordinance, for you to spay and neuter any of those animals?
No.
No? Okay. So let's look at the outcomes once these animals and live impounds total would be 5,329, but that includes all sorts of other animals. Focusing only on cats and dogs, 33% of the of the cats that come into the shelter are adopted, and pre-adoption, they would be mandatorily spayed neutered if we did nothing else today.
Currently, that is the practice.
That's the practice.
Yes.
And this ordinance wouldn't change that in any way?
No.
So we would continue to do that?
Yes.
And
Report on page 5, the first sentence says 41% of cats that enter the shelter are adopted or placed with rescue groups. And so how does that figure comport with the 33%?
I'm looking at table 5.
That's in addition to. You can see in the next line is adoption.
Let's complete Mr.
and then
Boyle's line of
rescue.
questioning, and then we'll come back if there are some uncertainties created.
So 33% of cats, 35% of dogs, under our current practice, those animals adopted, even if they're adopted to a
Adoption means to a private home.
okay.
Rescue is to another placement agency.
And so are the rescue animals
They are
spay neutered?
altered before they leave unless there's some kind of health issue.
So the proposed ordinance wouldn't change anything
Not
there either, so. So, and then we look at, staying with table 5, return to owner. 701 of the animals that come in are then returned to their owner, but let's focus specifically on the dogs and cats. 28% of dogs and 4% of cats are returned to their owner once they've come through.
Correct.
Under current practice or law, are any of those animals mandatorily spayed neutered?
Not mandatorily.
Okay.
It
but
is by the choice and the encouragement of the staff.
we suggest it and encourage it.
Yes.
So how would the proposed ordinance change that?
They would have to mandatorily.
They would have to
spay.
mandatorily,
Yes.
they would have to, or could they opt out by paying the $60?
As my understanding of the way the ordinance is written, they would have to. That's the secondary enforcement because the animal had been strayed. That's the first.
So the opt-out provision only, or ceases to exist when the animal comes into your possession. In other words, if the animal is caught as a stray, then the owner no longer has the option to opt out. They must stay neuter.
They must comply because it would be secondary to the first.
To the licensing.
To the license, well, actually to it getting out and being not on leash.
And so is that the only point at which it becomes mandatory, where if the dog or cat, or if the animal gets out, we capture it as a stray, then at that point, there's no longer an option to opt out. You must spay and neuter. Is that correct?
In the definition of the secondary enforcement that was on the PowerPoint earlier, there were a few different places where we would be enforcing, and one would be nuisance animals. So that would be barking dog complaints, to be able to go to the owner of the dog that's barking and saying, you've had this complaint, and in addition, we need to see if your animal is spayed or neutered. So it would be, there are a few different ordinances.
Well, why don't you highlight that? Because we're in the report.
Siobhan, do you have that?
Yeah.
Is that in the staff report?
She's going to put it up.
But no, we're in the staff report. That.
I'm trying to find it. Hold on.
Under the, is that page 8?
It's on page 8.
Okay. Well, but I see it here in the slide, but I don't see it in the staff report other than to enforce the requirement as secondary enforcement.
We just referenced the Pasadena Municipal Code sections where a violation could occur.
Okay, and these are but what I'm suggesting is that that's missing from the staff report, and I think that's what's caused part of the confusion, is it's not outlined in the staff report that the secondary enforcement means stray dog, unvaccinated, against rabies, unlicensed, animals left unattended, and leash law violations. So under any of those circumstances, then it becomes mandatory, and in fact, someone would have to, someone who is in violation or finds themselves in this situation would then have to mandatorily spay neuter their animal.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. That's helpful.
We turn to Mr. Tornick.
Well, if I could, just turnabout is fair play, Victor, so can I do a quick, or Terry, quick follow-up? I mean, isn't that why it's not an opt-out? If it was an opt-out under any of these scenarios, you just say, oh, let me write you a check for $60. And the whole intent is in that initial transaction, when perhaps the person doesn't know about the mandatory policy, they're told, okay, it's almost more like an amnesty or something. And again, it sounds like the remedy should be, maybe we look at that's just the first transaction and not in subsequent years. And maybe we add that to the list, that if you've already had to pay the additional licensure fee, and now in the next transaction that you have with the society, you're required to also do it. Maybe that would be the tweak.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess what I'm struggling with here is, you know, I mean, every speaker here wants to get to the point where we have a no-kill shelter, right? It sounded to me like every speaker recognizes that the irresponsible breeding plays a big role in this. And I'm not seeing the nexus on, you know, how we're getting to the point where we're educating people about the importance of spay-neuter, and we're not getting, other than suggesting it and giving people, it is an opt-out at the initial licensing stage. Unless you get to the secondary enforcement stage, then at that point it becomes mandatory. But I'm struggling with getting at the irresponsible breeder issue, and I don't see how we do that here. And I'm struggling with how we get to the no-kill goal. I'm not seeing the nexus with what we're attempting to do and getting to that goal.
Well, if I can respond to the irresponsible breeding or the accidental breeding, a couple of ways that we would be able to see that, especially in the case of kittens, are people repeatedly bringing us litters of kittens. You bring us one litter, okay, where did you get these kittens? And we do track the people who are, and we know are repeated people, whether they tell us they're their kittens or they found them somewhere. So to be able to track them and to be able to say, you need to get the male and female cat altered.
But can't you do that now?
We can, but we can offer it, but it has no teeth. We can't then go to have our animal control go visit the house and, you know, after they've brought us litter after litter of kittens. We can only do an offer and an education. So this would just give us an extra tool to be able to do that. When it comes to irresponsible dog breeding, some people are living in neighborhoods where they know that their neighbor is breeding dogs and they feel like they have no option and no way to report and get the problem solved for the dog breeding. That would give the neighbors an opportunity to call us and say, I think my neighbor is breeding, or there's a certain amount of noise coming from the residents, and that would then trigger us to go and investigate and see what's going on at the residence.
So someone complaining about a barking dog, you would now go out and the barking dog complaint in and of itself would trigger a license check, which would then trigger the spay-neuter of the dog.
Mr. Tornick?
Thank you, Mayor. Like my colleagues, I would like to thank all the folks that came out tonight. This is obviously an issue that gets people very emotional on both sides of the issue. The hope here, I think Victor's articulated very well, that the hope here is that somehow we can craft an ordinance that will address the stray cats and dogs, the no-kill business, and the irresponsible pet owners. The problem that I'm having is that as I sort of think through, it's not a question of the perfect at all, but I think that this ordinance, as it's proposed, will not achieve, there's no evidence that it will achieve the objectives of trying to reduce those big stray populations. I think these are a couple of good illustrations where it might be helpful, but the trade-off in terms of reaching into people's homes and impacting responsible pet owners, I think that trade-off is far too great. I think that it will create scofflaws. It'll just make a bunch of people, particularly on how we finally come out in the $60 business, it will just make people, contrary to what Steve had to say, I think that it will create people that who currently might be inclined to license their pets. I think it will disincline some of them from licensing their pets because they won't have the ability to maintain the pet the way they like it. And I think it's a regressive, someone called it a regressive ordinance because it clearly does have a bigger impact on people who may not be able to afford the fees involved in terms of spaying or neutering their pets. I think that what's been downplayed in this discussion, but was very evident in the earlier discussions about the bully breeds, is that there's no basis in terms of the science that really documents, although the staff report references it, documents a reduction in biting behaviors and that sort of thing. I mean, I read a lot of the articles. People were kind enough to send us all kinds of emails, and I read a lot of the links. And the evidence, the science on this is very conflicted in terms of the impacts of this kind of ordinance in terms of its success rate. So I think that we've got a very intrusive ordinance being proposed with very little basis in terms of real science, in terms of its proposed positive impacts. And I think the only thing that we can agree on is that the more beneficial approach here would be to educate the public, provide low-cost spay and neuter services to people who can not afford it, and to pursue this, in the case of the kittens and the feral cats, I've forgotten what it's called, the trap and neuter process. I mean, if we're going to invest time and effort in this process, I don't think it should be in trying to enforce an ordinance which I believe will drive costs up significantly without the desired effect, make ordinarily law-abiding citizens into scofflaws, and not achieve the no-kill option that we're after. I think we ought to put our money on education, low-cost spay and neuter, and trapping feral cats. So I think, I mean, I appreciate the effort that people have put into this analysis and discussion. I think it is an affirmative discussion for the community because it's an important issue. We spent, I don't know, 20 hours or 30 hours in public testimony on this. I like John, hope that we can resolve this tonight, and I intend to vote against it.
Mr. Masuda?
I too want to thank all the speakers tonight. You're very passionate and very informative as well. Steve and Elizabeth, I have a couple questions, and it's not about the $60.
Thank you.
You have a paragraph in here which talks about why you raised the age of dogs and cats from 4 months to 6 months, and that was done, that 4 months was on October 7th, 2013. Why?
The reason we did that was because the controversy over juvenile spays and neuters. because we knew it was a controversial aspect. We do practice juvenile spay and neuter at the Humane Society. That is our standard practice. But we knew that it was controversial and felt that moving it to 6 months would ease some of that.
I see. There was a lot of time spent talking about dogs. I had some constituents talk about cats. 2 questions. Why aren't cats licensed? And 2, why aren't there any exemptions for cats, for instance, at shows and things like that?
Well, the exemptions would apply to cats as well, if they are service cats, if they are show cats. So those same exemptions that are there for dogs would be there for cats. As for licensing for cats, that's up to the City Council, if cats are licensed or not.
In cities that you know, are cats...
The County of Los Angeles and the City of Bradbury, cats are licensed.
Oh, interesting.
Also in Inland Valley, a few of these cities.
Laverne.
Cats are licensed as well.
Okay. One last question. There's a lot of talk on education and outreach. And I agree with all the things that you have in this paragraph, but and how to reach the public, why not the neighborhood associations?
That is, we are exploring all different types of ways to get into the communities and speak with them. As Steve mentioned, we are revamping our humane education program, really trying to target children to then go and educate their parents when they go home from the education programs that we provide. So that is part of the plan of expanding our outreach.
Thank you. Mayor, I support the ordinance.
Here's Mia, Jackie.
I was saying, can we call the question unless there are more comments or questions
Mr.
from council
Madison
members?
was waiting to speak.
Mayor, I don't think you've indicated where you are on this. It may not be necessary, but I want to say with regard to Mr. Tornick's comments, somewhere in there he said we can all agree on this, and I can't agree with what he represented. First of all, we did take a lot of testimony in public safety from the Public Health Department and from the Humane Society that unspayed and neutered dogs are more aggressive. That's not, Steve, is that something the experts disagree about?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence in the record for that. Last year, of the 31 fatal dog attacks in the United States, I believe all but 1 or 2 were unspayed, unneutered male dogs. I mean, that is the evidence. Education, I'm not hearing anyone proposing some new budget for an education effort, and that's what we've been doing already. And what that has resulted in is thousands of unwanted dogs and cats that have to be put down. And I just think if we don't do this, we're basically rejecting the advice of the Humane Society, who are experts in the field and who have the job of carrying this out, and of our staff. And the final point I would make is the argument that we're going to turn current licensees into scofflaws makes no sense, because it then argues that education is a better remedy for those people than a mandatory spay and neuter. The point is, if you're unlicensed, right now we don't have any authority to spay and neuter those unlicensed pets. This ordinance gives us that authority. And that's really the key difference. And so when someone comes in, and I don't think it's helpful to call it an opt-out, because that's not the intent. The intent is that when you come in, you learn about the requirement. You may want to have the spay and neuter done by your own vet. You may want to have it done by the society, but you can pay a higher fee now as sort of an incentive to remind. But under all these other circumstances, there's no opt-out. It is a mandatory policy of the city, and I think especially if we do the year study period, we can come back and see. Maybe $60 is the right number. Maybe we should have no amnesty period. Maybe we should have a higher fee or something like that. But this ordinance, as so many other cities have found, is definitely a step in the right direction on an important
Mayor, I continue to struggle with this issue, but just to be clear, what the council's action tonight would merely allow staff to prepare an ordinance. It wouldn't mandate spay-neuter immediately. I mean, we would come back, you would draft an ordinance, and then it would come back to the council for 2 readings, and therefore 2 more votes.
Oh, sorry.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The action, if the council concurred, would be to direct preparation of the ordinance, and we would return with an ordinance for introduction at whatever that meeting is, and then adoption at the second meeting if it got the 5 votes at the first meeting.
So I'm prepared to, for the purposes of preparing an ordinance, to support the motion. I don't know that at the end of the day I'll support the ordinance. I think there's still a lot of issues that need to be hashed out, and so I would be prepared to support an ordinance that would sunset in 1 year if we don't achieve the goals. But I also think that the ordinance should include an education plan, should include an enforcement plan if we are planning enforcement. I think that's seriously lacking, and should include a plan with regard to the feral cats and the catch and release, for the lack of a better term, and then should also look at the issue of the $60 and whether that's the best approach. And I think we do have the low-cost option, but that should be clearly stated. A low-cost option plan should be clearly stated in the ordinance. So I'm prepared to support, for purposes of moving the matter along, an ordinance if the maker of the motion will agree to those issues being addressed in the ordinance. Oh, and one final thing. When you come back, I really would like to hear a report on the canvassing and the results of the canvassing and where we are.
Yes.
I've listened carefully to the testimony, and I'm grateful for everyone's willingness to come here and to offer their views. I've heard that this ordinance is imperfect action. It's not a perfect solution, or it's not solving all the problems, but it is another tool that can be used to deal with the problem of overpopulation and aggressive behavior. And I think that on balance, we should give this ordinance a try. If we don't like what we experience over time, we can take that into account. But we have spent a lot of time on this. We've had a lot of testimony and a lot of knowledge. Some of the information that has been provided has been discredited, but that's part of the political process as each of us on this side of the rail and on the other side of the rail approach a policy issue from an individual perspective. But I'm prepared to take a chance on this and see if we don't find that it is an additional tool to improve the quality of life and to reduce the problems that we've been talking about. With that, Mr. Jomsky, will you take a roll call vote?
Mayor, I just want to be clear on my suggestions. The 1 year report out and the other elements will be included in the ordinance.
And I think that was all implicit in the motion. And
You said a 1 year report back,
on the
not a sunsetting.
I think I did, but.
Councilmember Gordo?
Yes.
Councilmember Kennedy?
No.
Councilmember Madison?
Yes.
Councilmember Masuda?
Yes.
Councilmember McGostin?
Yes.
Councilmember Tornick?
No.
Vice Mayor Robinson?
No.
Mayor Bogard?
Yes.
The motion passes 5 in favor, 3 against.